Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's session on the role of technology in job creation. This is part of a broader learning event by Youth Impact Labs, a program within Masico that seeks to bring together, practitioners in the youth employment and tech space to identify, ways in which we can, use technology to address youth unemployment in emerging markets, both in East Africa and the Middle East. And so for today's session, I'll walk you through a quick introduction and give you some brief context, and then later on I'll bring in our panel that will be walking through a panel discussion session to really bring in insights and perspectives from different parts of the world, with a particular focus on Africa and the Middle East as our areas of intervention. And so for today's session, maybe I can start by quickly introducing Youth Impact Labs. We are a program at Masico that's funded by Google.org, and our mandate is to identify and test innovative solutions that are leveraging technology to address youth unemployment in these markets. We've been in existence for the last 3 years, worked with about 26 different partners, particularly the private sector, who are looking into the demand side of job creation and really connecting young people to jobs in these markets. And so over those 3 years, we've amassed quite, a lot of learnings on these subjects, which we are really hoping to, share with the broader ecosystem and much more catalyze a conversation, between players in this space around what the future of work looks like and how technology will continue to play a role in this space, and pretty much how players in this space can, work together to drive the agenda around technology and jobs. And so to set the stage real quick, what we're seeing in these countries is a youth bulge, that's characterized by, more people, a significantly young population, both in East Africa and the Middle East. The markets here are still not able to supply enough jobs. And so, a lot of these markets are characterized by a very large informal sector. In Kenya, only 17% of the population is in the in the formal employment. In Jordan, it's slightly higher, 46, but still, these economies still continue to struggle with, youth unemployment. Again, we see the digital economy rapidly growing. Globally, it stands at 11.5 trillion in terms of value. In East Africa, we through our research, we established that the gig economy stood at $109 million, and we sort of see this growing. And even in the current pandemic, we've seen a lot of rapid transition to online platforms. And so in our work at Youth Impact Labs, we've partnered, and we are part of a broader ecosystem of platforms that are working in this space. And we bucketed this into three. So we look at digital and gig work platforms. We see e-commerce and MSMEs. We see supply chain and logistics solutions. We do see platforms like, Daproim, Cloud Factory in Kenya that are, connecting young people to outsourced work in the US and Europe. In Jordan, we see platforms like Beit. We see Localized that's, helping graduates transition into the market. In e-commerce, we see platforms like Jumia, Kilimall, Sky Garden in Kenya, really, rising to the front. Shaki in the Middle East has also really grown. Well, on the logistics side, we see platforms like, Virtual City, Sendi, really transforming, logistics around, spaces like agribusiness, delivery of, transport services, etc. So really, wide spectrum of digital platforms that are transforming how young citizens in these countries access opportunities to both jobs and commerce activities. Now, to the question around what's really fueling this growth, we do see an inherent background of like a very informal sector. So while there are graduates coming out of colleges, the traditional job market is not able to satisfy that demand. But also we see a growth of access to infrastructure and devices. So things like smartphones have drastically gone down in terms of price. Access to these devices has grown. Internet and mobile penetration is very high in these developing countries, and that has really triggered access to these services. Again, we do see the entry of global platforms sort of catalyzing these spaces. In Kenya, we've seen a lot of local innovation that has seen the rise of local platforms like Sky Garden, Link, Sendy, GetBorder, all locally developed innovations. And we're also seeing like a lot of awareness within the youth around the digital economy as a frontier for them to step away from traditional job and career pathways. Again, we've seen COVID-19 really dramatically catalyzing this space and changing how young people access jobs and transitioning large sections of the consumer markets to online platforms, primarily driven by lockdowns and the fact that traditional commerce was not happening for a couple of months. And this is also something that we foresee being sustained over the next couple of years. And so with this background in mind, this sort of sets the stage for us to have a conversation around this subject. And we've brought together, a very interesting panel of, different practitioners in, a combination of founders, folks in the development space. So we have Ronit Avni from Localized. We have Farhan Kalalde from Impact MENA. We have Nina Oduro from IREX, which is a development organization. And we have Adam Grunewald, who's the CEO at Link, a platform that has been connecting blue-collar workers to markets in Kenya, and one platform that has been, a proud partner of Youth Impact Labs. So with this, I'd really like for us to have an open and candid conversation around technology and how this will feed into job creation in these markets. And I'd like to highlight, to our audience, there will be an opportunity for question and answers. So do feel free to post your questions into the streaming link that we have, and we'll be able to pick those questions and answer them as we move along. And also, I'd also like to sort of, highlight that the stream is open throughout the day. So if you do want to come back and access this conversation, or if you want to forward it to some of your partners, your co-workers, or people you think will be interested, do feel free to also relay these links to them, as they'll be accessible even after this this live session. I'll open up my my session today by asking the first question, which is really around the potential that technology has, and how we see this as a game changer for developing countries. And so I'll direct my first question to Ronit. You're a founder who has seen an opportunity, in emerging markets, particularly in the Middle East, around transforming how the supply and demand of labor works in these countries. And so it will be great to hear from you, like how you started this, and what are the unique circumstances you saw in the MENA region that have sort of created that opportunity for technology to be a breakthrough. So Ronit, I think you can open the floor for us with that question.
Thank you so much, Gituku. Thank you for having me, and to all the other panelists. It's great to be here and to be with you. So Localized was founded after some conversations with community leaders in Palestine who were facing a conundrum about how they were going to educate and connect their youth to employment opportunities from where they were in a situation which, because of political factors, was very difficult. So these were communities that had internet connectivity but no mobility. And at the time, I had previously run an organization where we worked with Palestinian professionals all over the world, in Dubai and Silicon Valley and London and Toronto, that were putting in hundreds of hours of volunteer time to my previous organization because they wanted to give back even if they couldn't go back. And so we began to think about what it would take for these top professionals to mentor or train or hire remotely youth in Palestine in the interim, given the challenges. And that began a thought process for Localized, where the community leaders said there were 3 conditions under which that made sense. Number one, it had to be linguistically localized. So whoever was training or upskilling or hiring had to speak the language. They had to be culturally competent, and they had to be excellent by any measure, so that the credentials of those that were doing the training were easily appreciated and recognizable, whether it was by an education minister or it was by other employers. And that began the research for Localized, which led to about 2 years of research looking into this question about how do you harness the expertise of professionals all around the world who may share roots with youth and who may want to share their insights and their expertise, whether they live in Ramallah or Amman or Cairo or Nairobi or Singapore, et cetera. And we were invited to pilot in Jordan. So somebody from the Royal Court at the time invited us to kick off. We now have partnerships all across the MENA region and beyond. So we have university partners and organizational partners in MENA, in India, in the United States. We even have one partner in Beijing, but also we have learners in Nigeria and in Kenya. We have about 60 countries represented on Localized. So I would say number one is that we're in a moment in history for the first time where you live and where your knowledge resides don't have to be the same. And so there's an opportunity for people to share expertise in ways that were never possible before. The level of mobile penetration in the MENA region, the level of education, literacy is incredibly high, mobile penetration very high. But youth that we encountered faced a real conundrum. So we ran a few focus groups in Jordan before we launched with university students at several very good public universities. And they said, look, our professors are good, our training is good, but we don't know what we can become when we graduate. We don't know what the titles are of the types of roles that we're qualified for when we graduate. So we don't even know what we should apply for. And these were engineering students, as an example. And that spoke to the gap between the education and industry, right? And this is true all over the world, where you may be trained for a particular discipline, but the sectors are changing so rapidly that the very nature of what's in demand, by the time it's taught in a class, it's almost too late. And so what we decided to do was to tap into this massive knowledge base of professionals who share heritage or share roots. They could be in Amman. So many of our experts are Jordanians in Amman, but they're also Jordanians abroad. They're also Egyptians abroad. So that because we found that people were more willing to give of their time and their expertise to the communities with whom they shared an affinity. And so that was the beginning of Localized, where we began to partner with universities and youth hubs to expose them to experts who were working in growth fields that were data and tech enabled, whether it was AI or cybersecurity or ed tech or fintech or med tech or renewables or robotics. And then as we grew that community and saw the potential of it, we realized that we were building out a talent pool that employers might want to tap into. And so the last thing I'll say, and turn it back to you, is that with coronavirus and with an exponential expediting of a transition to remote and virtual, which was happening anyway, but could have taken another 10 years, particularly in the MENA region, you suddenly have an openness to hiring where, let's say you have company headquarters for the EMEA region or the MENA region in Dubai, suddenly those companies are going to be 50% remote moving forward. Suddenly there's an openness whereas before you might have recruited from 3 specific university campuses in the UAE, but now you can recruit talent in Beirut and in Amman and in Cairo. And so that's the opportunity that I think we're just at the very beginning of.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Ronit, and I think your last point around the democratization of skills and connection of workers is something that we're also seeing not just in the professional market, but also in the less formal structures, and I know IREX has been recently looking into the gig economy, particularly even during this COVID-19 period. Nina, I know your team was working with some gig workers in the Kenyan coast. Could you speak to us about your experience in that program and how what lessons you've drawn from that, particularly around how tech is sort of bridging that gap between supply and demand for workers, and how tech is sort of transitioning or transforming access to work for this particular demographic.
Yeah, so thank you. So as you mentioned, IREX has been working on particularly a practitioner research project focused on virtual gigs and connecting young people, training first, and then supporting young people to access virtual gigs, particularly focused on transcription. And this process, working with the young people, we've learned a lot. And one of the key things that I would want to mention is about soft skills. And so knowing that skills development is truly critical, we paired the technical skills of transcription with learning about soft skills. And in our process, we identified the key skills that young people need to thrive in the virtual gig space. Now, the idea is that young people may not always focus on just one technical skill. They may try one, go to another, graphic design, different elements, different types of topics and areas they can go into. So the soft skills, just like in in-person work environments, are transferable. So we focused a lot on those transferable skills while they're learning a technical skills that can bring them income. But the long-term impact of that is what really we're learning and looking at. How do these young people not just access, opportunities as gigs, but knowing that there's risks to being in the gig environment. It's not always stable, it's very competitive. And particularly for the African market, it can be very hard to even secure a gig. And so looking at preparing them and enabling them to see that this is not the end all be all. How do we transition our skills and think about our long-term goals? So a lot of times people get into gigs thinking, okay, we can just do it. I just want to earn an income, but it's about resilience. Even accessing your first gig with the young people that we're working with is very difficult. Just pitching yourself, selling your skills. So some of the soft skills that we focused on are entrepreneurial thinking and communication, and particularly resilience has been something that they've been practicing as they pitch and get rejected. These are not things that you always learn in normal education systems. So going through with the process that enables these young people to practice and fail and practice and fail, that is key to the gig process, especially on online platforms where you don't navigate it the same way you would otherwise. But in terms of communication, we're talking a lot about networking online. What does it mean to connect with people on different social networks, bring it and sell yourself? So these are all particularly elements that we see. Look, technology doesn't take away the fact that these young people need the soft skills. It just makes it very acute into how they're able to leverage it to get opportunities. And more so than ever, I would say resilience has been one of the key elements, and communication, of course, but the key elements to sort of like keeping your spirits up. This is not going to, just because you didn't get it, how many times everyone's journey is different, but self-learning as well has been the other key element. Unlike, you know, in the online world and using technology, we're doing our trainings virtual. And so we know that, look, once the training is over, you have to learn on your own. You have to have the ability to self-learn. And so that is an embedded core of how we approach our trainings for the young people, that without us and without, you know, access to, you know, everyone that's supporting you right now, how will you leverage this and continue learning? What are the where will you go? What will you focus on? And so a lot of them prioritize key things that they want to focus on daily, each week, and focus on learning and continuing to learn, because in the online world, that's what freelancers do. They're continuing to just learn on their own, using what they've known, but then also, you know, finding new platforms, things like that.
Yeah, and it's good, you know, that you talk about, you know, the soft skills and, you know, some of the technical skills required to, you know, sort of bridge this gap. And, you know, you took a cohort of young Kenyans and said, let's work with these people. Let's understand what it takes for them to work online. How wide was that gap, you know, from between what the market needs, what an online market needs of a freelancer, and what these young people have? Like, could you just give us a picture of that? And then the other question, still, you know, somewhat related, is if we have to do this at scale, if we have to scale this transition of young people online onto these platforms, what will it take to sort of, you know, ensure this, you know, very fast learning uptake of these soft skills, and for them to effectively play on this platform?
Yeah, the first question about the profile of the young people, it is a wide spectrum. One thing I would mention is that when you know, working with young people for online-based work, there is a barrier to access for some young people that don't have devices, don't have access to internet. In the group that we have about a spectrum. All of them do have some access to a computer center or their own device. Yet we know that the gender, you know, even the gender digital divide, the women that will not be able to access because of opportunities and things that they have to take care within their homes and their environments. So that is a key thing that we're looking for, you know, lessons on to access. But the profile of the young people that we do have are two. There's a subset of the group that has some online gig work experience. Maybe they've already, you know, researched platforms and created a profile. Then the other half have no experience. They just are interested. This is a key. The first thing we wanted to just assess is motivation. So, are you interested, and what have you done to about the curiosity? You know, have you expressed some sort of curiosity already? For the young people that have some sort of experience, it's very limited. Maybe they've acquired just one job, or maybe they've just tried to apply before. And with that, we pair these groups up. So there's someone that has a little bit more knowledge, someone that has no knowledge, so that they can support each other. This has been something consistent throughout, so they can have that peer support. Like I said, self-learning will be very important when we're not there. So having that network within each other to support is how we're mitigating the lack of skills. Throughout, most of them have little to no transcription skills. So the technical skill is new for everyone. So they're mostly learning that, which takes a lot of self-learning even after the program. What I would say the barriers and the needs that I've seen so far have been that you can do the training all you want, right? But that support that they need after is a critical time. And so we're looking at how much time does a program really need to support hands-on support. You know, we're having one-on-one meetings. We're, you know, trying to figure out what's going on in their lives outside of just trying to secure jobs that are affecting them. That time period, I think, is so critical for helping young people to get jobs, We've had some that, you know, had the experience or, you know, had the small experience and quit. Oh, I couldn't figure out how to get my profile to be 100%. I couldn't figure out this, and they just stopped. That level of support from, you know, a company or organization that is looking at how they can access it is really critical so that they can keep at it. This is a long haul. And for some freelancers that we interviewed before this, it took them a year to get their first gig. So helping the young people really understand that even the expert giggers are not, you know, they just didn't wake up and pitch once and get it. And then connecting them to hear the insights from those so that it makes it real. It makes it real for them, yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, thanks for that, Nina. I'd like to switch gears a little bit. Now, Adam, you work on, you know, the other end of the spectrum, right? So, you know, Ronit and partly Nina are on the relatively formal side. Link, the company that you lead, you know, saw an opportunity in the informal blue-collar work market in Kenya. And, you know, could you know, just walk us through, you know, the opportunity that you saw in Kenya, particularly, you know, in what characterizes, you know, the labor market here, and, you know, your experience over the last, you know, 3-4 years establishing Link as a platform, and, you know, how you've been able to transform this market around how blue-collar workers access jobs.
Great, thanks so much for the question. Maybe I can start with like a bit of nomenclature. So I think, you know, obviously we as Link work with informal sector workers, but I think probably Nina and Ronit do as well, right? I guess anyone that doesn't have, you know, a formal contract that guarantees consistent income over time, whether they're a computer programmer or a graphic designer or a plumber, would often be classified as a gig worker. I think the big distinction is that we generally work with blue collar workers, so those that do, you know, more trade-based service work, so plumbers, electricians, carpenters, tailors, masseuses, etc., as opposed to people that do more white collar work in the form of computer programming or graphic design or accounting or transcription. I think that the reality that we found is that the vast majority of the population here in Kenya does work in this blue collar informal labor sector, because the barrier to entry for being a data scientist or doing gig work on Upwork or Fiverr is relatively high. I think, as Nina really aptly pointed out, right? You need access to the internet, you need access to devices, et cetera. And when not a lot of people have that, it makes it difficult to participate. Beyond that, a lot of these things might require levels of education, literacy, or formal training. You know, we work with painters that don't know the basic geometry to find the square meterage of a wall, right? Which might preclude them from other sorts of jobs. So when we looked at what we thought would be a meaningful social enterprise in the field of youth employment, we decided to start with where we thought it was biggest and messiest, and that is specifically around informal labor workers in this blue collar sector. And it's also largely because there seem to be the least solutions in this area, right? That there are the least amounts of support, companies, training programs, et cetera, in order to set up someone to succeed as a domestic house cleaner or other things like that. Yet this is where the vast majority of people need to go into work. I think another thing is when you do strictly digital gig work, you essentially have you have to compete with the entire world, right? If you're doing online graphic design gigs, then you need to compete with anyone else anywhere in the world that is doing these services, right? So it's very difficult to enact any sorts of you know, protectionist barriers in order to ensure that, you know, Kenyan youth, which is what we're very focused on, get those jobs. Whereas obviously for a cleaner or a mason, this is something that obviously is very proximity based and suggests that people will have those jobs. But I think on that note, you asked kind of what we've learned. We've been doing this for about 4 years now. We've matched over 200,000 jobs. We work with about 1,500 blue collar workers every month, ensuring them consistent income. And what we've learned is the most important thing to do is to start and work backwards from the demand side. I think a lot of interventions or initiatives in the youth employment space generally start from the supply side and say, wouldn't it be great if we taught people to do X, right? With very little validation that there's actually enough demand in the market to satisfy 100 new people having this skill and expecting to earn income from it, right? Or even beyond that, something that we think a lot about is the concept of replacement, i.e., if I train someone to be an accountant, yes, maybe they will get a job as an accountant, but does that then come at the expense of another person that wasn't fortunate enough to get that training or that extra leg up to get that job as an accountant, right? So what sorts of industries or initiatives are additive, right? What sorts of things create opportunities where those opportunities did not exist before? And this is something that's quite interesting to us. Some of the really strong success factors that we're proud of are seeing general willingness, it increases in the prices that the market is willing to pay for specific services, right? So I think for a lot of informal services or gig work, there's kind of a race to the bottom where you essentially assume that the quality is going to be bad and therefore try to pay the lowest possible price because you assume that the wall is not going to be painted nicely anyways. But in cases where you can assure quality, where you can upskill and train workers, then we've been able to unlock a customer willingness to maybe pay a higher price, which means more earning for workers. Or similarly, a great example is furniture. There's almost 100,000 young people working in the furniture industry here in Kenya, yet the share of domestically produced to imported furniture is worsening year over year, i.e. more imported furniture is coming into Kenya year over year, which means jobs are being lost. So this is something that we would consider distinctly additive if we're able to increase the market for domestically produced furniture. So I think working from a demand perspective to say, where can we create demand where it didn't exist before, or where can we get those that are willing to pay to potentially pay more, et cetera, is quite important, especially because with some of the metrics that Gituku was sharing, right? Like, it is a tremendous amount of people that will need to go into jobs, right? So there will not be a one-size-fits-all sort of solution, and there will need to be a ton of initiatives. And frankly, the Kenyan economy or the Jordanian economy is not large enough to provide enough jobs for the sheer amount of people that need them within those economies. So there needs to be things that are ready for export, right? That meet quality standards of other countries. There certainly need to be people that are doing online work for clients that are outside of those countries, et cetera. But obviously making sure that work that is done within a country is done by local youth within that country is incredibly important.
Sure. Great. Thanks, Adam. And you really talked about some, really interesting points about your approach, and it's pretty much what, as Impact Labs, our mantra has been that start with the demand side, and then now think about how do we service this demand and how do we structure the supply around this. Farhan, Impact MENA, has come in as the evaluator for Youth Impact Labs work, and I know over the last few months you've really been analyzing Youth Impact Labs and the impact that the program has had. Could you sort of give us some of the early insights from this exercise, and also speak largely to for an organization like Mercycorps and other development organizations that are seeking to leverage technology, how is this working out from a programming point of view and from an ecosystem change point of view?
Okay, thank you. I'm glad to be with you today and joining you from Jordan. To put things in perspective, just let me give you some historical background. So the Jordanian entrepreneurship ecosystem started in the late 80s. And when I say the entrepreneurship ecosystem, I mean support programs, including incubation and investment geared toward the startups. So this was the first generation, late 80s till 2000. In 2000, we have the second generation in which more programs was created covering, different aspects related to startup incubation, funding, debt financing, grants, etc. But we started recently seeing, more impact because we started seeing now the third generation. The third generation is more focused on specialized programs. So we're not talking about general incubation or acceleration. We're talking about supporting certain specific activities, certain specific business models. And this is what I think was really smart from Mercy Corps by launching the Youth Impact Labs, which is a program focused on a very specific kind of activities, which is gig economy and the shared economy. So the idea was, how can we support the new generation of Jordanian entrepreneurs to come up with new business models, to come up with unique operating models, to come up with unique value proposition, and to target specific customer segments or beneficiary segments. So this is just to give you a brief introduction on what has been happening in Jordan the last 30 years. Using technology, of course, as a enabler for certain business models, provide competitive advantage, provide basically more reach, and help these companies to be more competitive, especially if you're trying to disrupt traditional economy or businesses. And this is what we have seen in the group of startups we started talking with now. By the way, we are at the early stage of the evaluation, so I cannot provide a lot of insight now. But from what we have seen interacting with these entrepreneurs, it's clear that they were very specific in targeting certain segments that has suffered before, or they didn't get any support before. They were smart in picking the industries, because some of these industries didn't see change for the last 30 or 40 years. And they were smart in coming up with the value proposition that really, solves a problem, solves a certain pain, faced by these segments, by these beneficiaries. So
and what were some of these industries? Can you just highlight 2 or 3 industries?
For example, if we talk about food services, for example, catering services, and providing, meals was done by your traditional restaurants and service providers. One of the companies came up with a model to enable housewives basically to provide the home-cooked meals through, a smart mobile and online platform. So this helped them and enabled them to be an economic contributor actually to the household income. At the same time, provided a different service, a different value proposition, because many people would like to have a homemade meal and not eat in a restaurant. So this is an example of one company that developed such business model and was very smart in the way they executed it. For example, you mentioned another company, Sharqi Shop. Basically, we had an influx of Syrian immigrants who came to Jordan because of the crisis, and these people are talented, artists. These people, are really good in developing certain handicraft products, and these handicraft products have global market potential. So people now, the trend, we are, sick of buying, mass-produced products, and people are looking for customized, handmade products. So the issue was how to promote, how to sell these products, and Sharqi Shop worked basically on building, mechanisms how to sell it online, and building an online marketplace to sell these products being produced in Jordan by Syrians, artisan, and sell it everywhere in Europe and other places. So we've seen, so these people are using technology to do different things. They're using technology to sell. They're using technology to promote. They're using technology to connect, help customers search for better options, deliver. And all these are different ways how technology can be utilized.
Sure. Yeah. And yeah, it's great that, you sort of paint that picture around, how we are utilizing technology. And I know you highlighted, even for Syrian refugees, sort of bringing them into the demographic. And I think that speaks to the question around inclusion, where, we've seen as far, as much as technology is, coming in as a solution to youth unemployment, there are vast sections of the, certain sections of the population that have been left behind. And, I want to push this question to Adam, around inclusion. So, with technology and how we've used it for blue collar workers, we still see large sections of, like rural areas. We see people who do not own devices, still being excluded from, this online labor market. And so as you grow your platform, Link, how do you see yourself, like driving this inclusion question? How do you see, yourself still roping in fundis who might, by fundis is artisans in Kenya. So how do you see yourself roping in artisans who, might be inherently excluded by the fact that this is being done on an online platform, either because they don't have the skills, or they are coming from sections of the country that are traditionally locked out. Yeah. So how will you see platforms like Link, working towards more inclusion?
Yeah, I guess I'd start by encouraging maybe everyone on this call and everyone listening to kind of reframe their perception. Obviously, platforms should be inclusive, but actually, I think, going back to what I said before, working backwards from demand to then try to reconcile between supply and demand. The point is that the status quo is uniquely exclusive. So any platform that is designed is inherently designed to be inclusive, right? A platform, a marketplace is designed to solve a point of friction, right? What is that point of friction? Maybe a farmer can't access a local market, right? This is a point of exclusion, and a marketplace that links these two is uniquely designed to solve that point of friction, right? So there's obviously a ton of points of friction or lack of access, right? Whether it's access to the internet, access to a car or transportation, access to a language that helps you communicate with a specific type of customer base, or anything else. And I think each platform or each initiative here is designed to solve one or many of these points of friction or points of exclusion. And again, in a case where there is demand for a certain type of worker and there is supply that meets that demand, probably a platform shouldn't exist or doesn't need to exist. There's so many other cases where the level of demand, right? The desire that a certain tech company has in terms of the skills of a graphic designer and the current level of graphic designer that need to be reconciled, right? That's where platforms should exist. Something that there is a graphic designer that has all those skills and there is a job opening and it just makes a match. There's a lot of those, and I don't know you need much more than like a pretty good matching algorithm to do that. So I think the most interesting platforms are those that reconcile a gap and are inherently inclusive. In the case of Link, for example, when we initially tried to start the business by taking a whole bunch of people that said that they were plumbers and finding a whole bunch of people that needed plumbers and matching them, we had a lot of disappointed customers and disappointed workers, right? We had a lot of cases where the job did not go well for a litany of reasons, right? The worker could not get access to the right materials. They didn't have the right tools. They couldn't get transportation. They couldn't communicate effectively. They couldn't deal with so many of the soft elements of customer interaction, negotiation, everything else. And all of those are reasons that, customer demand is not in line with the current status quo level of supply. So the way that Link has been built is we essentially identify all those points of friction on the value chain for each of the services that we work with, and we take it upon ourselves to solve them. We call it entrepreneurship infrastructure, right? Our hypothesis is that a manicurist or an esthetician that has 6 months of training, maybe it's the best training ever of how to manicure, but can this young man or woman really understand the microeconomics of effectively setting prices, or engaging customers, or understanding how to turn a customer into a repeat customer, or what to do when someone is angry or doesn't pay, right? All these sorts of challenges that I'm sure every person on this panel can tell you, it's hard to be an entrepreneur and to run your own business, even with lots of education and terrific support. So the average informal sector worker to say, go forth and start your plumbing company, we think is generally not likely to succeed. So what Link does, and why I think the platform is inherently inclusive, is because it finds each of those gaps that exist and solves them. So you gave the example of access to devices. That, 60% of the workers on our platform did not or don't have smartphones, right? We have to design all of our technology to work via SMS or USSD. We have loan programs for smart devices, et cetera. We have so many other initiatives. Just talking about now in terms of COVID times, most of our workers couldn't get access to the required PPE that they need in order to do their jobs, right? Almost all of the services on our platform are those that need to take place in physical proximity. They cannot be done remotely, right? No one can do house cleaning remotely. It just can't happen. And when you're in the gig economy, right, you don't have any kind of social security benefits or support that keeps you going. So as people are getting back to work, making sure that they have the right equipment, the right safety equipment, tools, et cetera, even making sure that they can get access to the transportation that they need to get to site. These are each problems that we take upon ourselves. Okay. So I think, maybe I want to say one more thing. And that's, I think one area that platforms can do a lot in, though, is finding marginalized communities or groups. So for example, if there's very few women participating in a specific trade, and seeing if they can break down barriers in that area. And that's something quite important to us that we've seen a lot of success with as well.
Okay, great. Yeah, in the interest of time, I think we'll wrap it up there. But, just, as we wrap it up, maybe Ronit, the closing question maybe for you is, what do you see as a post-COVID future, for jobs and employment, and how, what do we see? How do we see technology transforming this space, in a post-COVID future? And in a very short way, I'd like you to answer that so that we can really stop this at this point.
Absolutely. So the shift to remote work is going to continue. We're talking to employers all across MENA who are basically saying that even when COVID is over, they're planning to be hiring more regionally. They're planning to be more virtual. They've opened up their sense of what's possible. So I think the trends we've seen, the acceleration to virtual, to remote, all of that we've just seen compressed from what could have been a decade away is happening now. I think the only exception to that is in the early childhood space, where I think we've all seen that around early stage childcare, that actually you need that to be in person. But I think all the things we know have been accelerated, and a deeper appreciation of the education space and the education technology space.
Awesome, great. Thank you so much. I know we have a hard stop now, so I think we'll wrap it up there for today's conversation. But just to really thank you for such a rich conversation. I know we haven't gone through all our questions, but I think we've been able to really build a very strong conversation around the few areas that we picked on. Okay, so at this point, we'll turn it over to the audience. We already have some questions coming in, and I'd like to remind our audience, which is who are watching us live right now, that you can type in your questions into the comment box, and we'll use the time that we have remaining to speak to your questions. Again, if we are not able to answer your questions during this session, we'll be more than happy to reach out to you later after the session and answer your questions directly. So we'll go to our first question, which goes out to Nina, and this is a question coming from one of our audience named Pero. So Pero asks, given that so many millions have lost formal employment as a result of COVID-19, the competition for online work is at an all-time high. What would your advice be for people who are joining the online gig economy? And Nina, I'd like to tie this to another question that's coming from Leah. Leah is asking, are there opportunities for local online gig jobs in Kenya? If so, what are some of the platforms? So over to you, Nina.
Thank you, Gituku. Great question about competition, and especially with COVID, we're only seeing more and more competition online, as with the growth of more opportunities online. So everyone wants to work remotely. A lot of jobs have been lost, as you noticed. What I would say young people can do to position themselves well are focus on self-learning. So I mentioned before that young people are now on their own at home. Education systems has often been disrupted during this time in COVID as well. So identifying some of the skills that are necessary to succeed in obtaining virtual gigs is really important. I would emphasize soft skills like resilience, entrepreneurial thinking, and communication as key to focus on. But then I would say, do not lose the fact that technical skills are very necessary. So identifying what technical skill you want to focus on. It could be transcription, it could be graphic design. There's numbers of areas where you can take some of the learning and experiences that you were doing pre-COVID and figure out what you want to focus on for online work and specialize in. So that's another thing. Specialization is really critical. Knowing how to do something just a little bit online is not as effective as really getting more and more experiences and becoming, even working towards an expert level. It takes time, but you want to pick one thing that you want to be an expert at.
Yep.
The last thing I would mention is to identify your long-term goals. So it's not just going to be an online gig that may take you to the next goal that you want, but if you want to be an entrepreneur, these are pathways to reaching those long-term goals.
Yep. And what are some of the platforms that are there in Kenya and maybe in other developing countries that young people could tap into, just to name a few?
So there's a wealth of online platforms. Link is one of them, which is on this panel as well, particularly in Kenya as well. I would say if you're in Kenya, Ajira Digital, the Kenya Ministry of ICT program has a number of platforms that you can look at on their website in Kenya for local jobs. Outside of that, Upwork, Fiverr, there's so many gig platforms. An exercise that I have young people do actually is provide a list of, find out what all the platforms you could be, and then research what it takes to get on. For some of them, they charge you. Some of them, they take a portion of what you make. So you kind of want to weigh, what do I have now? Maybe I don't have money to pay to get on a platform. Upwork is free to get on. So those are some of the ones that you would look at that also have Kenyan opportunity.
Yep. Sounds good. And to our audience, if you know about any platforms that offer online work, feel free to type them into the comment box, just to the benefit of the rest of the audience. Our second question goes out to Adam. And having worked in the blue collar sector, there's a question that came in in the registration phase, which asks which groups are benefiting more from jobs created. And having with your experience in the blue collar worker sector, Adam, it will be great to hear from you.
Which group is benefiting more from jobs created by technology? I don't know. I mean, I think that there's very few jobs today that aren't empowered by technology in some way, right? Whether that's digital technology or just machinery advances or other things like that. So I don't know that like informal sector workers versus white collar workers or blue collar laborers are at an advantage or disadvantage. I would say that some of the biggest efficiencies created by technology are the ability for a person to deliver work or a service without the need for physical proximity, right? So in the case of a graphic designer or a transcriber or something like that, many of these platforms and the advent of the internet and other forms of technology have allowed, you know, a person to do a job from here in Kenya that can be done for someone in Bangladesh or the United States or something else. So I think in that way, people in the blue collar sector are definitely at a disadvantage when this sort of proximity is necessary, right? You can't paint a wall remotely and you can't do so online. I also think that a lot of the recent attention, right? I think it's fair to say that from the perspective of global donors or the development finance institutions, the areas of you know, more techie jobs are definitely a bit sexier, trying to equip people to be computer programmers or anything. And this goes with a narrative around the fourth industrial revolution, and that jobs of the future are those jobs in AI and machine learning and other things like that. But realistically, I think that this is a narrative that is not well suited and is not well customized for the context that we're in for Kenya or many other countries in Africa. I think obviously machine learning, artificial intelligence, et cetera, is important, but most of the jobs in industry over the last decade and over the decades to come will be in areas like construction or other sorts of infrastructure.
Okay, sounds good. Same question. We'd want to hear the perspective from Ronit. You've worked, in transitioning students to, job opportunities. What are some of the groups that you see benefiting most from this, from technology and, job creation?
I agree with Adam that almost every sector now is tech or data enabled in some form. And so it becomes a critical skill like literacy. So it's now a baseline in a sense to be able to function at some level technologically. And I think it's also a question of to what extent do people control the platforms and the decisions that are going to impact them no matter what. So the more literate and the more conversant you are in how these work, how the AI algorithms work, how decisions are made, you have more agency in influencing them over time. So I think it's a basic skill as opposed to a luxury. That being said, certainly there are certain sectors, as Adam said, that lend themselves more to tech than others. So anything that is in the white collar space is now tech and data enabled. But frankly, even construction is, so you're seeing it from restaurants to construction. It may be how you're finding work. It may be how you're logging inventory. It may be how you're selling either your skills or the goods that you've got. So I just think it sweeps across the board. So it's a little bit, if there are more specifics, I'm happy to dig in.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ronit. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. It's been an exciting session. And, unfortunately, we have to wrap up. But to our audience, thank you so much to all of you for tuning in to a fantastic panel today. Thank you for sharing your insights and perspectives. And we'd like to keep this conversation flowing. Again, I'd like to remind you that, today's session is part of a broader learning event, and we have, the next session coming up, in the next half hour that's going to look into, the question around resilience. And again, we'll also be having 2 other sessions looking at inclusion, and another one looking at the future of work tomorrow. So let's keep the conversation going. If we were not able to address your questions, once again, we'll make efforts to follow up and answer them. And again, if you'd like to, come back and, access the platform and, probably pick up some of the sessions you left, I'd want to remind the audience that, this session will be live even after this session and subsequent sessions. And so you can, revisit it or share it with your friends, your colleagues, and other players in the space to sort of, draw from this knowledge. Again, you can get material on Youth Impact Labs from our website. That's www.mercycorps.org /Youth Impact Labs. and you'll get to learn about our interesting work and insights from from the last couple of years. So thank you everyone. Thank you to our audience. Thank you to our panelists, and wish you a great rest of the evening for those of us in East Africa, as well as a great rest of the day for those in the Americas and the rest of the world. Thank you so much, and bye to everyone.